Brilliant. All right, let's do this. So I am going to firstly just try to unveil this without looking. I can just achieve. I find it interesting. I think in a sense I'm looking at it and reading it in at least two different ways. One, at scale, and this is the interesting thing about interpretation, how much of this is the background that we live in ourselves. So at scale I see it almost like a map of a city, and the kind of configurations and plans and buildings, but then simultaneously buried into that I see symbols, and as you get closer the plan disappears and symbols take it over, and this kind of scale of operation. The color spectrum is intriguing, yeah, it's interesting, but in a kind of non-remarkable way for me, strangely. I find it very sort of almost evoke the attempt to evoke this kind of slightly ethnic or whatever color range, which I find interesting but not necessarily provocative. The question I'm just contemplating is where is the domain of the human? The other thing I find interesting is how the size of it pushes me to come closer and then retreat almost in a linear. So its kind of shape and its structuring is, I find it's interesting how it drives the participant to behave physically in a domain space of it. Well, I have no history in this stuff, so I'm giving you just how I feel and what I think. The most interesting texture for me is that one up there, the kind of the green and yellow where they become blurred with the kind of crosses, the black crosses. It's the one where the kind of the ambiguity of texture and the ambiguity of kind of color comes through, and the certainty of color just diminishes. And those are the pieces where I think it suddenly comes to life. I'm not evoked to love it. I'm evoked to understand it. I'm not evoked as a human being. I'm evoked as a mind, as a kind of complex, as a pattern of thought. And yeah, I find it interesting. There's layers of kind of from city to kind of, I don't know, I would say almost weapons. I mean, that strikes this whole configuration. So it's a layered piece, no doubt, or it creates space for layered interpretation, no doubt. So I think, you know, whether it's this and the multiple reading of this, like, there's lots of layered interpretation in it. I'm left to enjoy it as a challenge but not enjoy it as a kind of question, as a human question. And it's interesting how much of this is color bias as well. I wonder if these color ranges were different, would we be talking about the same interpretation? So it's obviously, it's a clever piece of work. It's clever. It's one of those pieces that you'd almost want to see being painted. And I think you would enjoy its playfulness at the point of being painted, being made, more than you would enjoy it as a product, in its playfulness as a product. I think the play, I assume, and I don't know, was because the iterations would be, and how the logics would come together piece by piece, and they would be able to work in their mind and see these domains come together. And that would be quite human and quite joyful. At the point of making, I think and there would be great play in their mind. I could see probably they would be smiling as something else could be interpreted out of the same object and be able to work through the scales. So I suppose it's one of those pieces that perhaps at the point of being painted would have been a great piece to be seeing being painted and put together. I think that's where its humanity existed. And it's one of the, I would say, its humanity existed at the point of being painted. For me, the thing that holds out is in a way, art being the relationship between the piece, the maker and the piece, and simultaneously the participant in the piece. And we often get stuck by the piece itself. So in a sense, I would say perhaps what you're doing is capturing art more than traditional museum owners. But it does throw the question, when museums and art galleries collect pieces, what are they really collecting? In a sense, what you're doing is collecting the thoughts. And is that not the real piece of art? We pay so much for the pieces of art, but we invest so little in the relationships it builds up. Maybe arts and museums and artists should be collecting the thoughts that a piece provokes. That is perhaps more important than the piece itself. And these are mere proxies of those thoughts. Maybe that would be the real art of tomorrow.